She pointed at him in front of everyone, 40 people watching, latte in one hand, black belt around her waist, $1 billion in the bank. Hey you, the maintenance guy. Her voice carried across the entire room, easy, casual. The way you spoke to furniture. Want to spar? Just for fun. A few people laughed. Someone whispered, oh no, he was holding a wrench, gray uniform, work boots. The man who fixed their broken pipes and changed their burnt-out bulbs and whose name exactly 0 people in that room knew. He set the wrench down. He walked onto the mat. The laughter got louder. An intern covered her mouth. A senior manager actually turned away, already embarrassed for him. She smiled. The smile of someone who already knew how this ended. 30 seconds later, she was on the floor. He was standing exactly where he'd been. Hands at his sides, nothing on his face. He didn't smirk, didn't bow, didn't wait for applause. He walked back to his wrench and kept working, and nobody in that room was laughing anymore. What if the person mopping or lobby floor wasn't just a janitor? What if the billionaire CEO who called him out in front of everyone had no idea she was about to learn the most important lesson of her career? Not from a boardroom, not from a mentor with a corner office and a wall of credentials. From a man in work boots and a gray maintenance uniform who hadn't stepped onto a fighting mat in 12 years. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Or been the one who made someone invisible without even realizing you were doing it? This is that story. The Tuesdays started like every other Tuesday at Crestline Operations Group. The Denver skyline was doing its thing, big, wide, indifferent. Dull winter light pressing against the glass exterior of the 12-story building on Wasey Street. The Rockies sitting purple and distant behind it all, like they always did, like they didn't care what happened inside. Stephanie Harlow cared. About everything always. She was already on the 4th floor by 8:40 a.m. Guillaume, belt tied, shoes off. The company wellness program had been her initiative, her signature. Her insistence that executives should know what their bodies felt like under real pressure. Not the pressure of quarterly targets or investor calls. Physical pressure. The kind that doesn't negotiate. 14 people stood on the mat. All of them in Crestline branded athletic gear, navy blue, company logo stitched at the left chest. The kind of uniform that said we are a unified team without anyone actually feeling unified. Some of them had been doing this for 3 months. Some had joined 2 weeks ago because HR sent a second reminder with the word mandatory underlined. Stephanie didn't care how they got there. She was demonstrating a hip escape. The mechanics were precise. Left foot planted, right hip dropping, body rotating away from the imagined opponent on top. She walked through it, slow, then faster, then slow again. Her voice carried across the room without effort. She had the kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to fill a space. She was explaining the importance of not panicking when you're on the ground. How the instinct is always to scramble up immediately. How that instinct gets you caught. And that was when she noticed him. Not because he made a sound. Not because he moved. Because he didn't. Daniel Whitmore was in the far corner of the room, crouching beside the ventilation unit that had been rattling since Monday morning. Panel off. Outside his left in a row, the kind of organized that came from years of working in confined spaces where losing a screwdriver meant losing 20 minutes. He wasn't watching her exactly. He was looking at the mat, at the movement, at the mechanics, not the way people looked when they were curious. The way people looked when they recognized something. Stephanie had trained with 3 national champions, 1 Olympian, and a retired MMA fighter who'd once broken 2 of her ribs during a sparring session and apologized for it later over coffee. She knew what recognition looked like in another person's body. The small stillness, the unconscious lean forward, the eyes that were tracking not the performer but the technique. She stopped mid-sentence. Her executive team looked at her, 14 pairs of eyes. Waiting, she walked toward the corner, slow, unhurried, the way she always moved when she was thinking. Daniel heard her approach and looked up from the ventilation unit. He didn't stand. He didn't look alarmed. He just looked at her. Brown eyes, level, no particular expression. You know what I'm teaching, not a question. He considered it for a moment, honestly, like the question deserved honest thought. His voice came out even, without deference. Guard pass. Your base is a little high on the left side. Nobody moved on the mat behind her. Stephanie Harlow studied him. The maintenance uniform. The work-worn hands, the scar along the left side of his jaw that was old enough to have stopped mattering to its owner. The way he was still crouched at the ventilation unit like this was a perfectly ordinary conversation to be having. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Then show me. He took off his work boots. That was the first thing. He untied them carefully, set them side by side at the mat's edge with the kind of deliberateness that suggested he had a system for where things went. Then white socks on the dark mat, which should have looked ridiculous. It didn't. He walked to the center and turned to face her. No stance, no posturing. Just standing, arms loose at his sides, weight distributed the way a person stood when they weren't trying to do anything yet. The 14 executives had stopped pretending to adjust their athletic wear. They were watching. One of them, Karen, head of logistics, had both hands clasped in front of her mouth. Another had his arms crossed so tight he looked like he was trying to keep his own chest from flying open. So Stephanie raised her hands. He mirrored it softer. She went first. Left shoulder feint into a collar grip attempt, standard opening, information gathering move designed to see how he responded to contact and pressure. His hand was already not there when her grip arrived. Not defensive, just repositioned. Like he'd already been standing somewhere slightly different. She circled. He turned with her but didn't close distance. She tried a hip entry. He adjusted his weight 3 inches to the left, and her center of gravity suddenly had nothing to find. She recovered, shot low for a single leg. He shifted, and she wasn't wrong exactly. Her timing was good, her angle was good, but somewhere in the execution she overcommitted by maybe a quarter second, and she felt it the moment it happened. That sensation of having given too much before receiving anything back. His right hand touched her shoulder. Barely. The lightest redirect, and the floor rushed up. She landed on her back. Clean, not painful. The kind of fall that was almost comfortable. Almost graceful, no. There was nothing almost about it. It was technically perfect. The way it had been applied was technically perfect. Not a throw. A consequence, the room made no sound. Stephanie lay there for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Staring at the ceiling with its recessed lighting and its corporate beige tiles. Thinking in the strange calm that followed something unexpected, that the left side of her base really had been too high. She sat up. Daniel was standing where he'd been. Not close, not far. Hands back at his sides, weight still even, looking at her with an expression that contained no triumph whatsoever. Her voice came out steady because she made it. Where did you train, Marines? A pause that was not theatrical, just accurate. Long time ago, he walked back to the ventilation unit, sat back down, picked up the diagnostic tool he'd set aside. Stephanie stood, brushed off her gi, turned to face 14 people who were all doing slightly different versions of the same thing, trying to look like they hadn't just watched what they'd just watched. She clapped once. Let's talk about base control. But something had changed in the room. She felt it the way you felt a pressure drop before a storm. Invisible, physical, impossible to ignore. And deep inside her, beneath the composure and the collected posture and the black belt tied with disciplined precision, something she hadn't felt in a very long time was beginning to ask a question she didn't yet have language for. Amanda Reeves hadn't meant to see any of it. She was delivering revised budget projections to one of the executives in that room, a task that should have taken 30 seconds. Drop folder, leave, done. She'd arrived at the door of the 4th floor gym just as Stephanie Harlow said, "Then show me," and something stopped her from walking in. Instinct, good instinct. She checked through the narrow glass panel of the door instead. The whole thing, the boots coming off, the white socks. The stillness of the man in the maintenance uniform before it started. The way Stephanie moved, all precision and competence, and 11 years of training, and the way he barely moved at all, and somehow that was enough. Amanda's phone was in her jacket pocket. At some point, without making a conscious decision about it, her hand went in and came back out with the phone already unlocked. She didn't lift it until he redirected Stephanie's shoulder, until the floor arrived. She filmed the last 40 seconds. Not all of it, just enough. She stood there after the footage ended, after Stephanie had stood and turned back to her class, watching through the door as the maintenance man settled back in front of the ventilation unit like he'd never left. Amanda Reeves was 24 years old and had been interning at Crestline for 7 weeks. She had a degree in communications from University of Colorado, Denver, a minor in journalism, and a working understanding of what a moment looked like when it mattered. This mattered. She didn't know why yet, only that the clip on her phone felt heavier than 40 seconds of video had any right to feel. She went back to her desk, put the folder down, and sat very still for a moment. Then she opened the clip and watched it again. 6 months before that Tuesday, Daniel Whitmore had walked through the service entrance of a building he'd never heard of with a toolkit in his left hand and a paper bag in the other. February in Denver. Brutal in that specific Colorado way, dry cold, bright sun, no softness in it. The kind of morning that was technically clear and still managed to feel like punishment. He'd started at Crestline on a Monday. HR had been efficient. Badge, building orientation, supply closet location, protocol for submitting maintenance tickets through the digital system. He'd nodded through all of it and asked 3 clarifying questions, and none of them were about people. The job was straightforward. HVAC maintenance, electrical, plumbing assists. Anything that broke and needed someone who understood buildings as systems rather than spaces. He was good at it. He'd always been good at understanding what a thing needed to keep functioning. The hours were 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. That mattered. That was the specific reason he'd taken this job over 2 others that paid slightly more. Because 2 p.m. meant he was at Kearney Elementary by 2:40, which was exactly when school let out, which meant Olivia never waited more than 3 minutes at the pickup line before she saw the truck. Some logistics were non-negotiable. Olivia was 8. She'd been 8 for 4 months. She had her mother's hair dark, fine, naturally curling in the Colorado humidity, and she had his habit of going very quiet before she said something that turned out to be unexpectedly precise. She carried a backpack that was technically her size, but that she insisted on packing so full it listed to the left, because she could never decide which books to leave at home, and the answer was always none of them. She had named the maintenance cart at Crestline on her 3rd visit to the building. She'd come with Daniel one Saturday to retrieve a tool he'd left, and she'd seen the large gray rolling equipment cart in the supply room and looked at it for a long moment and said, "That's Big Frank." Daniel had explained it was a cart. She'd reached into her bag, found a marker, and produced a piece of masking tape she apparently just carried, and labeled it Big Frank. The tape was still there. Nobody had removed it, including Daniel. Her name for the mop that lived in the 4th floor supply closet was Gerald. She'd never met Gerald. She'd simply heard Daniel mention cleaning supplies one evening and decided a name was appropriate. Gerald, she'd informed him, seemed like the dependable type. Daniel had not argued. Every morning started the same way. He was awake at 5. Coffee from the green insulated binder that Olivia had given him for his last birthday, which she called Mr. Green with the seriousness of someone naming a family member. The coffee was instant. Emma had always made real coffee. He'd kept the French press in the cabinet for 2 years after she died, and then donated it because looking at it every morning had become a kind of tax he couldn't keep paying. At 5:50 he woke Olivia. She surfaced from sleep the way she did everything gradually, with great intention, taking her time. By 6:10 she was dressed, usually in whichever shirt had the most interesting animal on it. By 6:20 they were in the truck. At Kearney Elementary, she always hugged him twice before getting out, once fast, once slower. She'd developed this ritual around age 6 and had never explained it, and he'd never asked. "Be safe, Daddy," always those words. She'd been saying them since she was 5. That sentence could carry him through anything. He'd learned not to question the things that kept you moving. There were things Daniel Whitmore did not discuss at Crestline Operations Group. He did not discuss the 12 years of Marine Corps service that preceded this job. He did not discuss the rank he'd held, the training programs he'd run, or the particular kind of expertise that came from spending a decade teaching other people how to use their bodies as instruments of controlled force. He did not discuss Fort Armitage. He especially did not discuss Fort Armitage. The maintenance work suited him partly because it was physical and partly because it required then the same careful attention to cause and effect that he'd spent years training. A building told you what it needed if you paid it attention. Most people treated buildings like furniture. They expected them to work and only noticed when they didn't. Daniel noticed earlier than that. He noticed things. It was both his best quality and, in certain configurations, the thing that had destroyed a significant portion of his life. March 2012. Fort Armitage, Virginia. He'd been Staff Sergeant Daniel James Whitmore, Marine Corps, hand-to-hand combat instructor. 12 years in, performance evaluations that were, uniformly and without exception, excellent. He was not the most gifted natural athlete he'd ever trained, but he was the most patient instructor, and in his experience, patience taught more than talent ever did. He had never, in 10 years of running drills with soldiers of varying skill levels and temperaments, caused a serious injury, which was the detail that made March of 2012 so specifically, irreversibly devastating. Corporal George Calloway, 34 years old, late entry into military service, having spent several years after college before enlisting, smart, good-humored, curious about the mechanics of things rather than just their execution. He and Daniel had been assigned as training partners 4 times before that session without incident. The session was routine, medium stress level, counter takedown simulation, the kind of drill Daniel had run hundreds of times. George came in off in a way Daniel noticed from the first exchange. Breathing wrong, a half-second lag in his setup, the particular quality of movement that, if you knew what you were looking for, read as a body that was already working harder than the situation warranted. Some kind of tension imported from outside the training room. Daniel had noted it. He had asked, "You good?" And George had said, "Fine, let's go," and they'd continued. That was the moment Daniel would return to, over and over again in the years that followed. The moment of asking, accepting the one Santha, and continuing the 4th exercise. Single leg takedown attempt from Calloway, harder than the assigned intensity, body out of expected position by degrees that were small but compounding. Daniel's counter was textbook sprawl and control joint lock, appropriate to the drill parameters. Except George's momentum had carried him to a position that wasn't where the joint lock expected him to be. The adjustment Daniel's body made was automatic, 12 years of automatic. The sound was small. George didn't get up. The investigation found no fault. Medical review found that the injury, a spinal compression at L1, L2, resulting in loss of motor function from the waist down, was consistent with the mechanics of the drill under abnormal positional variance. The panel's language was precise and exonerating. Daniel's own accounting was simpler. He had known something was off. He had asked once. He had accepted the answer. And a man who had not done anything wrong except move incorrectly at the wrong moment would never walk again. The base medical officer had found, during the subsequent evaluation, markers for what was classified as delayed response PTSD, a specific pattern under high stimulus conditions, a lag developed between sensory input and motor correction, the kind of thing that was invisible in normal operation and potentially catastrophic in a high-speed physical environment with another human being. Not a fitness for duty issue in civilian life, the officer had said. But continuing in a combat training role presents elevated risk. Daniel had submitted his resignation before the evaluation was officially filed. He moved to Denver in 2013. Married Emma Whitmore, a pediatric nurse from Fort Collins, with a laugh that startled people the first time and then became the thing they came back for. Olivia arrived in 2016, small and precise and already going quiet before saying things that mattered. Emma died in a highway accident in 2019 on a Tuesday afternoon in November when the roads had iced faster than the forecasts predicted. Olivia was 3. She did not remember her mother's voice, but she had inherited the laugh, the startling kind, the kind that pulled people in the garage of the rental house in West Denver. Behind the second-hand workbench and the spare tire and the plastic storage bins that had moved with him through 3 apartments, there was a training mat. 2 meters by 3, thick foam, worn smooth at the center. He'd bought it second-hand from a gym in Boulder that was closing down. He trained on it every evening after Olivia was asleep, not for readiness. Not to maintain combat effectiveness or any phrase that sounded like something official. He trained because the movement was the part of himself that the investigation and the resignation and the weight of Fort Armitage had not been able to touch. His body still knew how. And forgetting it felt like something he couldn't afford to lose on top of everything else he'd already lost. Nobody knew. The people at Crestline did not know. His neighbors, if they knew he existed at all, did not know. Olivia knew. Olivia knew because she had gotten up for water one Thursday night around 9:30 and seen the garage light on and looked through the small window beside the door and watched her father moving in slow, deliberate patterns across the mat. She had watched for 2 minutes without interrupting because she was Olivia and she had better instincts than most adults about when to stay outside something. The next morning she'd said, very matter-of-factly, over cereal, "Were you dancing last night, Daddy?" He had spent 10 minutes explaining what he'd actually been doing. She'd listened with complete attention. Then she'd nodded once and said, "Okay, Gerald needs to be careful then." He'd stared at her. Gerald is a mop, I know." She'd gone back to her cereal. "I just think he'd want to know." He hadn't been able to explain why that conversation had made him feel, for approximately 3 minutes, genuinely okay. Stephanie Harlow had not wanted to be a CEO. Or more precisely, she had not wanted it the way people chose things when they were choosing for themselves. She had wanted it the way you wanted to breathe when someone was holding you underwater, which was to say she had no experience of wanting anything else. Colonel Arthur Harlow, United States Air Force, had raised his daughter in a house where excellence was not aspirational, it was assumed. The first time she won a district competition at 14, he'd reviewed her technique afterward and pointed out 3 inefficiencies. She'd asked if he was proud of her. He'd said, "Pride is what people feel when they run out of higher standards." She had decided at that moment that she would simply never give him the opportunity to run out. She became the highest standard she could locate. Stanford double major honors. Company founded at 25, profitable by 27, 8-figure revenues by 30, 11-figure valuation by 34. The youngest woman on the Forbes regional list 3 years running. The kind of achievement stack that looked like ambition from the outside and felt, from the inside, like running on a surface that kept moving. Her father had died of a heart attack in his Colorado Springs apartment in 2021, alone. A neighbor had called for a welfare check. She'd flown back for the service, organized everything, shook every hand, spoken well, returned to Denver the following week, and not taken a single day off. She called his voicemail sometimes. The number hadn't been disconnected. She'd say, "I won again today, Dad," and hang up. She'd been doing it for 3 years. She would never, in any context, have described this as a grief practice. Coach Walter Pruitt had been her instructor since she was 15. 63 years old, built like someone had packed 40 years of mat time into a medium frame and let it set. Head shaved clean, white beard trimmed close. Hands too large for the rest of him in the way of people who'd spent decades gripping things. He had the particular patience of someone who had watched talented people ruin themselves with their own egos, often enough to have developed a specific and useful immunity to it. He had told her once, when she was 17, and had just won a regional title in a way that was technically flawless and humanly unkind to her opponent. You can win from a place that doesn't cost you anything important, or you can win from a place that costs you everything that matters. Right now, you're doing the second one. She hadn't understood him. She was working on it still. She had met George Calloway through his sister Donna. Donna had been her close friend at Colorado Springs Central. The kind of friendship that formed between people who were both using the same after-school club as a reason not to go home to their respective, differently difficult houses. They'd been in the book club together for 2 years without either of them particularly liking books. The books were beside the point. George was 8 years older than Donna. He'd already been working when Stephanie first met him, sitting in the driveway of the Calloway house, fixing a bicycle chain and looking up when she walked by with enough recognition in his face to stop her. "You're the one who broke Tony Lester's guard at the district tournament last month." She'd stopped. "You watched that?" Donna wouldn't stop talking about it. "I'm George." He'd wiped his hand on his jeans and offered it. "That hip switch you used in the 3rd round, was that deliberate or instinct?" She'd blinked at him. Most people at that age did not ask her that question. She'd said, "Deliberate. I drilled it for about 3 months." He'd nodded, the nod of someone who understood the value of drilling something for 3 months. Smart. He'd been to 3 more tournaments before he came to one he'd been working or traveling or genuinely too busy, but when he came, he sat in the front row and watched every match. And when her father's row was empty, which it had been increasingly often by that point, George Calloway's presence in the front row was not nothing. It was not nothing at all. She'd been halfway through her 2nd year at Stanford when Donna had called her on a Thursday afternoon in April, with the particular flatness in her voice that Stephanie had never heard before and immediately understood. George had been in a training accident. He would not walk again. Stephanie had booked a flight that night. She'd sat beside his bed at Walter Reed for an afternoon. He'd looked at the ceiling with the equanimity of someone who'd had enough time to only begin processing what had happened. He didn't cry. He didn't perform composure. He just was in that bed with the reality of it, and something in his face said he was going to figure out what to do with this the same way he'd figured out everything else. Accidents happen, he'd said. Not for her benefit, just as a fact. But whoever did this, I think he's going to carry it a lot longer than I will. She had not asked for a name. That was the thing she couldn't explain to anyone and had never tried to. She had not asked. Some part of her had made a decision in the moment that knowing the name would require her to do something with the name. And she was 22 years old, sitting in a military hospital, watching the closest thing she'd had to a brother looking at a ceiling. She hadn't been ready to do anything with a name. The executive meeting that afternoon of the Tuesday sparring session was the quarterly facilities review. Ronald Bassett ran the facilities and operations department with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years believing that the most important thing in any building was making sure nobody noticed the building. Though gray-templed, sober-shirted, reliably unexciting, he was exactly the kind of person who kept things running without anyone thinking to thank him for it. He had a good mind for systems and a limited imagination for the people inside them. He had 7 slides. Slide 5 he got there and paused, the way presenters paused when they were about to say something they'd rehearsed. We currently have 3 maintenance staff on the daytime shift. With the automated HVAC monitoring now covering consistent building diagnostics, one of those positions is technically redundant. We're looking at a consolidation that saves the company approximately $71,000 annually. He didn't say the name Daniel Whitmore. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew who the newest, lowest seniority maintenance employee was. Stephanie was reading an email on her tablet. She didn't look up. Her thumb scrolled once, twice. Her voice came out even and administrative. If a position can be covered by a system, consolidate it. 3 people nodded. The meeting moved to slide 6 afterward. Ronald Bassett found Amanda Reeves at the shared workstation near the communications bullpen. He didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of her desk in the way people stood when they were delivering information they wanted to keep deniable. I heard you were at the gym door this morning. Amanda looked up from her screen. I was dropping off files. Right. His voice was careful, neutral, the voice of someone who'd learned to say things without quite saying them. If there's any phone footage from this morning, just something to think about. Content like that, it reflects on the company, on the people involved. He let it sit there. Just thinking out loud, he left. Amanda looked at her screen for a long time without seeing it. She opened the clip, watched it, closed it. Then she went back to work, but she noticed later, reviewing it for the 4th time that evening in the parking garage before driving home, one frame she kept returning to. The moment right before it started, before Stephanie's first movement. Daniel Whitmore standing on the mat, hands loose, nothing in his posture that declared anything. His left hand was very slightly closed, not a fist, just closed, like someone holding something down. She watched that frame for a long time. Amanda found it on a Thursday morning, not through Google, not through any database a civilian would think to check. She'd been a journalism's minor, which meant she'd spent 2 semesters learning where information went when people didn't want it found. Military archives, regional publications, veteran community newsletters with circulation numbers in the hundreds, uploaded as PDFs to corners of the internet that search algorithms treated like furniture present, ignored. The newsletter was called the Armitage Observer, published quarterly by a veterans support organization based in Quantico. The issue was 12 years old. Page 4, below an advertisement for a moving company and above a notice about a memorial golf tournament. The headline was 8 words. Training incident leaves Marine corporal without use of legs. The article was 3 paragraphs. It named the unit. It named the exercise. It named the outcome in the careful, neutral language of an organization that had lawyers and also a community it needed to hold together. The injured party, Corporal George Calloway, 34. The supervising instructor, Staff Sergeant Daniel James Whitmore. Amanda read it twice. Then she printed it. She sat at her desk for 11 minutes without moving. Around her, the communications bullpen was doing its morning thing: keyboards, coffee, the particular ambient noise of people performing productivity. Nobody looked at her. Nobody noticed the paper face down on her desk. She thought about Ronald Bassett standing at the edge of her workspace saying, just thinking out loud, with the careful neutrality of a man who was doing exactly the opposite. She thought about the clip on her phone. The left hand closed. She picked up the paper. She went upstairs. Stephanie was in the middle of a call when Amanda appeared in the doorway. She held up one finger, the universal signal for 60 seconds, and Amanda stepped inside and stood near the bookshelf and waited. The paper held flat against her leg. The call ended. Stephanie looked up. Something in Amanda's posture communicated that this was not a routine delivery. Amanda set the paper on the desk without preamble. I found this through a veterans archive database. It's not indexed publicly. I wasn't looking for anything specifically. I was looking for context. Stephanie looked at the paper. Read the headline. Kept reading. Her expression did not perform anything for the room. It simply went very still, the way faces went still when the brain was doing something that required all available resources. The name George Calloway, that was the moment. Not the headline, not the date, not the description of the incident. The name. Because the thing about carrying a name for 12 years without ever saying it aloud was that when you saw it in print unexpectedly, in a context that connected it to something you were standing inside right now, it did not feel like information. It felt like the floor had briefly become optional. Stephanie set the paper down. Thank you, her voice doing the thing it did when she was using it as an instrument rather than a reflex. Close the door on your way out. Amanda left. The door opened. Stephanie stood up and walked to the window and stood there looking at nothing for a while. Denver going about its business 12th floor below. George Calloway, 34. She'd been 22 when she'd sat beside his bed. He'd been looking at the ceiling. Accidents happen. But whoever did this is going to carry it a lot longer than I will. She had not asked for the name, and now the name was the person who had redirected her onto the mat 3 days ago, in her own building, in front of her own employees. Who fixed her building's mechanical systems. Who left his equipment cart labeled Big Frank and apparently had a mop called Gerald and came through the service entrance before anyone else arrived because the quiet was the thing he was there for. She pressed her fingertips to the glass. The glass was cold. She left them there anyway. Then she turned around, sat back down and made 2 decisions. The first, she was not going to call HR. She was going to call Donna Calloway. They picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice had that slightly outdoor quality it got when she was working background sounds of wind, the acoustic texture of someone who spent their days thinking about how land and built things could coexist without one destroying the other. They went through the motions of how are you with genuine warmth and genuine efficiency. Then Stephanie said the thing she'd needed to say. Donna's silence had a different quality from the comfortable pauses they'd been trading. Once, Donna finally said. He said the name once, after about a year. He wasn't angry when he said it. That was the thing. He said it like it was information. Stephanie absorbed this. He said, Doc continued slowly, like she was reading from something she'd memorized without trying to, that whoever that man was, he hoped he was still doing something with himself. Because carrying something like that without a reason for being alive would be a terrible waste of a good person. Stephanie's throat did something she controlled by looking at the ceiling. What are you going to do? Donna asked. I don't know yet, she meant it. I genuinely don't know. She hung up and sat very still. Then she opened a new calendar invitation. Subject, Team Resilience Workshop. Mandatory, casual attire. Friday evening. She needed people in a room. She needed to figure out who Daniel Whitmore actually was before she decided anything. She called Walter Pruitt. He answered on the 1st ring. Already cleared my Friday, he said. I haven't said what I need yet. You need someone in the room who understands what you saw and doesn't let you turn it into something else. His voice was patient in the way of someone who had been coaching people for 40 years and no longer needed to perform patience. I'll be there. Early, she held the phone for a moment after the call ended. The workshop invitations generated exactly the speculation she'd anticipated. By Thursday afternoon, the building had a theory. The theory was that someone was gotten fired. The workshop was a cover. By Thursday evening, the theory had evolved. The workshop was about the video which existed, which several people had seen. For Friday morning, 3 different group chats had received the 40-second clip through channels that made its origin untraceable, and the phrase, the janitor thing, was circulating in tones ranging from amused to genuinely unsettled. Daniel heard about the event from the facilities calendar, where it appeared as a room booking that included his name on the required attendance list. He read it twice. Then he went back to the report he was writing about the fourth-floor HVAC unit, which had been running clean since Tuesday, but which he wanted to document properly so whoever came after him would have a complete record. He did this with everything. Complete records, clear documentation, the work that made the next person's job easier, whether or not they knew it. He picked up Olivia from after-school care that evening, and she told him about a conflict that had arisen in her class, about who had naming rights over the classroom fish. Her position was that the fish looked like a Leonard, and the class had named it something wrong, and they'd go vote again. Daniel asked what it was currently called. Olivia's expression conveyed exactly what she thought of the answer. Splash. He made dinner, she did homework, he checked her spelling, she noted that English was badly designed and he could not argue with that. At bedtime, she hugged him once fast and once slower. Be safe, Daddy, always. He went to the garage. He trained for 45 minutes. Nothing complicated. Movement drills. The kind that kept the body honest and allowed the mind to do the thing it needed to do without interference, which it was process. He was not afraid of Friday. He was careful about Friday. Those were different conditions. Walter Pruitt arrived at Crestline at 4:15 on Friday, 90 minutes before the event was scheduled. He wore a grey Henley and black slacks and carried his belt folded over one arm like a cloth napkin. He found Stephanie in the conference room adjacent to the main hall, going over her planned presentation one more time. He looked at the slides. He looked at her. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her without asking. Show me the real footage. She looked at him. The edited version makes a clear point about Stephanie. His voice was not raised. It never was. I have watched you train for 19 years. I have watched you win 7 regional titles, 1 a national, and a competition in Phoenix where you competed with a hairline fracture in your left wrist and told me about it afterward. I know what it looks like when you make decisions from confidence. He let that settle. Show me the real footage. She pulled up her phone, found the full clip, set it in front of him. He watched it, all of it, without expression. Then he watched it again, and this time she watched him watch it. His eyes tracked differently on the second viewing. Not the drama of it, not the outcome. The technical sequence, the angles. The way Whitmore's weight distribution changed in the half-second before each exchange, almost imperceptibly, and only in exactly the direction he'd need it to go next. Pruitt set the phone down. A long silence. Who is he? I'm still finding out how long since he trained seriously. I don't know. Pruitt looked at the phone again. At the frozen full-frame Daniel standing, hands at his sides, nothing declared. That's not someone who stopped training, Stephanie. That's someone who trained so thoroughly that the training became structural. It's inside him. You don't lose that. He pushed the phone back to her. What are you planning to do with the edited version? Show it as a leadership demonstration. Control under pressure. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what it was? It's one reading. It's a reading that cuts out the part where he makes a choice. His voice was not accusing. It was, as always, simply accurate. The choice is the whole point. Stephanie looked at the slide deck on her laptop, the carefully trimmed footage, the narrative she'd built around it. I know, she said. And the thing was, she did. She'd known it since she'd designed the edit. She was doing it anyway, or had been planning to, because there was a version of this evening that ended with her having recovered the ground she'd lost on Tuesday. That version required the footage to say something specific. Pruitt stood up. I'll be in the back of the room. I'm not going to do anything. He folded the belt back over his arm. Unless I need to. She watched him go. Then she looked at the edited slides for another minute. Clicked through them one more time. Closed the laptop. The room filled at 6:15. 43 employees, which was most of the building's daytime staff. They found the rows of chairs, the lowered lights, the large screen at the front, and made the same calculation people always made in corporate settings. This was either going to be useful or forgettable, and the odds of forgettable were high. Ronald Bassett took a seat in the second-to-last row on the aisle, with the particular posture of a man who had decided to be neutral about whatever was about to happen. Daniel came in 60 seconds before 6:30. He took a seat in the back row without looking for anyone. The same work boots, freshly cleaned. Stephanie stepped to the front at exactly 6:30. Navy blazer over a white shirt, dark jeans, hair down, which was unusual. She looked like herself. Slightly adjusted the armor present but not fully deployed. She said, "Before I show you what I plan to show you, I want to show you something else." She picked up the remote and she played the real clip, all 40 seconds. No edit, no ambient music, no slow motion at strategic points. Just the original footage, the mat, the boots coming off, the exchange, the redirect and the landing, and the hand offered and the hand refused, and Daniel walking back to the ventilation unit and picking up his diagnostic tool. 40 seconds of silence followed by 40 more seconds of silence. Stephanie set the remote down. That was Tuesday morning. Most of you know about it. I was going to show you an edited version that made a specific point about leadership and control. She paused. The problem with that version was that it required removing the part that actually mattered. The room was doing the specific kind of quiet where people were breathing more carefully than usual. The part that mattered, she continued, was his choice. He was in a position to end that exchange in a way that would have been significantly more difficult for me. She did not perform discomfort about this. She simply stated it. He chose not to. And then he went back to work, Walter Pruitt, in the back row, had his arms crossed and his chin down and his eyes on her. He did not move. I've been thinking about what kind of person makes that choice, Stephanie said. I thought at first it was about restraint, technical discipline. But it's not exactly. She found the right words and used them without flourish. It's about knowing the difference between what you can do and what you need to do. And choosing based on the second one, she stopped there. Did not over-explain. Did not build toward a lesson statement. I wanted you to see the real version. That's all. She sat down. The applause started slowly. Not obligatory, something was working itself out in the room, something that needed a beat to resolve into a physical response. Then it was actual, genuine, the kind that happened when something unexpected had occurred, and the body responded before the brain had time to deliberate. Amanda Reeves, at the AV equipment, looked at the back row. Daniel Whitmore was not applauding. He was looking at the front of the room with an expression she could not read from this distance, and his left hand was resting open on his knee. Open, not closed, across the room. Pruitt found Daniel at the coffee station near the back exit afterward. He poured himself a cup, did not look at Daniel directly, did not introduce himself. After a moment, without preamble, without looking up from his cup, Ogoshi variation into an off-axis redirect. The angle you used on the entry was about 15 degrees flatter than standard. That's not her textbook adjustment, Daniel looked at him. You drilled that specific variation, not a question, at some point. A lot, yes. Against someone who overcommits to the left, second and third exchange. Pruitt looked at him for the first time. You've been out of it for a while, 12 years. And yet, Daniel picked up his own cup. The coffee was terrible. Muscle memory doesn't disappear. It just waits. Pruitt turned back to the coffee station. I've been coaching her since she was 15. She's the best student I've ever had. Technically, he let that sit. She tweezed from a place that has nothing to do with winning. You understand what I mean? Daniel understood exactly what he meant. Pruitt pulled a card from his wallet and set it on the table beside the coffee carafe. Then he walked toward the door without looking back. Daniel looked at the card. Just a name and a number. He put it in his breast pocket. The Reddit thread hit 200,000 views by Saturday afternoon. By Sunday morning, it had been shared by the 4 verified martial arts accounts on Instagram, a fitness influencer with 3 million followers who added the caption, "This is what actual technique looks like," and the official account of a veteran advocacy organization that had captioned it. We don't know who this man is, but we see him. ESPN's combat sports feed had gone with. The maintenance workers' hip mechanics are cleaner than half the competitors we've covered this month. Stephanie read every single post. She did not eat dinner. She was at her desk in her home, in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, glass and clean lines, and absolutely nothing personal on the walls, scrolling through comments with the focused absence of expression she used when processing things she didn't have a framework for yet. One comment found her at 11:15 on a Sunday night, when her defenses were running on low charge. You can tell he's carrying something heavy. You can tell he's been carrying it for a long time. The fact that he's still this gentle with it is I don't know. Something. She put the phone down. She got up from her desk and went to the hallway closet. She didn't open it. She just stood in front of it for a moment with one hand on the handle. Then she went to bed, did not sleep for 2 hours, made a list in the dark of things she needed to do in the morning. The list was 1 item long. Monday morning. Her email had 47 new messages from the weekend. The last one in the queue was from an address she didn't recognize for 3 seconds, and then she did. George Calloway at kennehi.edu. Subject saw the clip. She read the email. Steph, small world doesn't cover it. I recognized the technique before I recognized anything else, which is funny, I know. He's still teaching, just differently. Don't be too hard on yourself. I wasn't then, and I'm not now. Gee, she read it 3 times. The 4th time she went to read it, she stopped before her eyes reached the first word and just looked at the screen. She'd been 22, she'd sat beside his bed. He had said, "Accidents happen," with the equanimity of someone who had made a decision about how they were going to handle the rest of their life, right there in that hospital room. She had not asked for the name. She had been telling herself, for 12 years, that this was because she hadn't been ready to do anything with it. She understood now, sitting in her office at 8:40 on a Monday morning with 47 unread emails and her coffee going cold, that this was only half true. The other half was that she'd known at 22, with the particular clarity that sometimes arrived in terrible moments, that knowing the name would require her to be bigger than she was. And she hadn't been sure she was big enough. She still wasn't sure, but she was older, which wasn't the same thing, but was something. She hit reply on George's email. Gee, thank you. I don't have the right words yet, working on it. She sent it before she could think about whether it was enough. Ronald Bassett came to her office at 2 on Monday with a folder. The folder had documentation. He set it on her desk with the deliberate placement of a man who understood that what he was doing was not going to land well and had decided to do it anyway because the numbers supported it. He sat down across from her without being invited, which was actually appropriate given the nature of what he was about to say. He set his hands flat on the desk in the gesture of a man who had decided to be accountable for something while simultaneously not being accountable for the conclusion. The viral situation changes the optics, he said. I understand that. But from a liability perspective, Stephanie, if the press makes the connection an employee with direct physical contact with the CEO who was involved in a prior incident resulting in permanent injury to a third party, our legal team has concerns. Stephanie looked at the folder, did not open it. What concerns specifically? Negligent retention. If it becomes a story that we knew and kept him on, it's not a story, Ronald, because there's nothing to retain. Her voice was level. Precise the way a blade was precise, not aggressive. Just accurate and not interested in being anything else. He was cleared. The investigation was complete. He has no record of subsequent incidents. What you're describing is not a legal liability. It's an optics concern. Those are the same thing. They are not the same thing. The edge in her voice was not raised. One is a matter of facts. The other is a matter of narrative. I know the difference. Ronald picked up the folder. He was quiet for a moment, then carefully. The press has been making inquiries through the communications department, I know. Amanda's managing it. A pause. Amanda Reeves is a first-year intern. Amanda Reeves has better instincts than 3 of my senior communications staff, and I'm correcting for that. She looked at him directly. The answer to every press inquiry is that Daniel Whitmore is a valued member of our team. If they have specific factual questions, they can submit them in writing. Ronald nodded once, turned to go. A piece of paper slipped from the folder as he shifted it. It landed on the floor between his side of the desk and hers. He didn't appear to notice. He was out the door before she could call after him. She came around the desk and picked it up. It was not a piece of their legal documentation. It was a post-it note, a name and a number. The name was a reporter's name she recognized from a national business publication. The handwriting was not Ronald's. She stood there with the post-it between 2 fingers and looked at the closed door. She took a photograph of it with her phone. Then she set it in the center of her desk and looked at it for a long time. She called Donna Calloway again that afternoon. Not for new information. She already had the information she needed. She called because she needed to say the thing out loud to someone who had been there at the beginning of it, who understood the full length of what she was carrying and had been carrying it alongside her in a different configuration. Donna picked up on the second ring this time. The outdoor sounds were quieter today inside somewhere, the particular acoustic warmth of a workspace with walls. I almost used the edited video, Stephanie said. No preamble, no how are you. At the event on Friday, I had it ready. I'd trimmed it so the fall was gone and the framing was exactly what I needed it to be. Donna was quiet, And then I sat in that room with Walter looking at me like he already knew, and I thought she stopped. Found the actual thought, the one underneath the explanation. I thought about your brother sitting in the front row at every tournament my father didn't come to. And I played the real version. I know, Donna said. He told her me. He watched recording of the whole thing. Stephanie absorbed this. He watched the event. Someone filmed it. It's on YouTube. 43,000 views as of this morning. A pause that had something almost amused in it. He sent me the link with the message. She did the hard thing. Tell her I said so. Stephanie looked at the mountains through her window. She did not say anything for a moment. Then, he's coming on Friday. I know that too. Donna's voice had the quality it got when she was choosing words with care. Not because she was unsure of them, but because they mattered and she wanted them to land right. He's been wanting to be in the same room as Daniel Whitmore for a long time. Not the way you might think. He has nothing to settle. He settled it on his own. A pause. He just wants Daniel to know it's settled. From him, directly. In person, Stephanie closed her eyes for a moment. Steph, Donna's voice was very quiet. You didn't ask for his name 12 years ago. No, I think you were right not to. I think you knew you weren't ready to do anything good with it. A pause. You're ready now. That's why it found you. Stephanie held the phone for a long moment after the call ended. Outside, Denver was doing its afternoon thing, the particular shift in traffic sound that meant the school day had ended, the city beginning its slow exhale toward evening. She thought about Olivia Whitmore getting into a truck at the Kearney Elementary pickup line. The backpack that listed left, the twice hug. Be safe, Daddy. She thought about what it cost a person to be someone's safe thing, to be the one they scanned the line for. She thought about her father's voicemail. Then she went back to work. She had a space to secure on Marigold Street, a Friday to prepare, and a conversation she hadn't figured out how to have yet with a man who communicated primarily through the quality of his stillness. She called the Marigold Street building manager at 4:15. The community center on Marigold was not technically available. The building manager explained this at some length. It was a former church non-denominational, closed 2021, acquired by the city for community programming purposes, currently in a transitional administrative status that meant nobody was using it, but the paperwork for anyone to use it was in a queue. He was sorry. The earliest availability was 6 to 8 weeks. Stephanie listened. Then she said, I'd like to discuss a 6-month lease at above market rate, a commitment to any required remediation costs up front, and a conversation with whoever holds the administrative queue. A pause. Today the building manager was quiet for a moment. I'll make some calls. She had the paperwork by Thursday afternoon. She forwarded it to Daniel through the internal facility system with a message that said, Marigold Street, 6 months, for the program you're going to build. Keys are at the front desk Friday morning. His response came 40 minutes later through the same ticket format. That wasn't necessary, she typed back. I know, 30 seconds passed. Thank you, she read it. Set the phone face down. Picked it up again. Read it again. Then she went back to work. She had a Friday event to prepare for that was nothing like anything she'd prepared before, which meant the preparation was mostly just deciding what not to do, which was harder than it sounded. She did not design slides. She did not write a script. She did not prepare talking points or an opening statement or a 3-part framework for whatever this was going to be. She dragged chairs into a circle in the 6th floor room on Thursday evening, alone in the building at 7 p.m., and she stood in the middle of the circle and looked at it and moved one chair 2 inches to the left and then moved it back. She left it imperfect, on purpose. The thing she was preparing for could not be made perfect in advance. She understood that in the way she stood technical things clearly, specifically, without sentiment. You could not edit your way into honesty. You could only arrive at it by not having prepared an alternative. Daniel received the keys on Friday morning. They were in a manila envelope on his equipment cart, which was Big Frank, which had been Big Frank since a Saturday in April when an 8-year-old had located a marker and a piece of masking tape and made a decision. He opened the envelope. Read the address on the paperwork. Read it again. Folded it and put it in the breast pocket of his uniform, next to Pruitt's card, which he still hadn't done anything with, but also hadn't moved. He stood at Big Frank for a moment with his hand on the handle. Then he went to fix the 2nd-floor bathroom faucet that had been submitted as a ticket on Tuesday and had been waiting its turn. He picked up Olivia at 2:40. She was in the front of the pickup line because the after-school teacher had walked her out early, which was unusual. "Why were you first?" Daniel asked when she climbed in. She arranged her listing backpack in the footwell. "I told Miss Perkins I had somewhere to be. You don't have somewhere to be. You have Dad's work event." She looked at him with the expression she used when she found the distinction he was drawing unhelpfully narrow. "That's somewhere." He did not argue. He drove. He had arranged for Olivia to sit with Karen from logistics during the first part of the evening. Karen had 3 kids and a gift for practical accommodation that she applied to everything from quarterly shipping projections to unexpected 8-year-olds in need of somewhere to be. She had said yes without asking why, which was, in Daniel's experience, the mark of someone genuinely competent. He had not told Olivia much about the evening. She had not asked much. She had asked, in the truck on the way, whether Gerald was going to be there. He had explained that Gerald was a mop, and mops did not attend company events. She had considered this, and said she thought Gerald would probably be fine with that. He had said he thought so too. She had gone back to the book in her lap, which was a library book about migratory birds, and they had driven the rest of the way in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had lived together long enough that silence had texture. Ronald Bassett came back Thursday afternoon with an update he'd framed as a courtesy. He appeared in her doorway knocking this time, which she'd noticed he'd started doing, and said the legal team had reviewed the situation and concluded that there was no actionable liability in Daniel Whitmore's continued employment. He said this without apparent investment in how she received it. Then he said, "I wanted to tell you that I've declined any further contact with the reporter." He paused. "And I've asked communications to route all media inquiries through Amanda Reeves." Stephanie looked at him for a moment. "That's the right call." He nodded, started to leave, stopped in the doorway. "I've worked in operations for 30 years, he said, not turning around. "I'm good at it. I know what keeps a building running." A pause. "I think I've been confusing the building with the people in it." He left before she could respond. She sat for a moment looking at the empty doorway. Then she made a note to herself about Ronald that did not go in any file, but would stay with her through the next performance review. Amanda knocked at 4:30. She came in with the particular energy of someone who had been carrying something all day and had decided this was the moment. "A podcast reached out," she said. "The martial arts account that did the technique breakdown. They want to talk to Daniel. Strictly up the mechanics. They think he could build something." Stephanie thought about this. About a man who had spent 12 years making himself invisible, and what it would mean to reverse that on someone else's timeline. "Give them his work email," she said. "Tell him it's his decision entirely. Don't frame it as a company endorsement or a company opportunity. Just his decision." Amanda nodded. Didn't move. "Something else I just want to say." The pause of someone young enough to still be surprised when their instincts turned out to be right. "I almost didn't post the clip. Ronald made it feel like the smart thing was to not get involved. But you did, because getting involved was the true thing." She met Stephanie's eyes directly. "I thought you should know I know the difference." Stephanie looked at her for a moment. "I know you do. That's why you still work here." A pause. "Make an appointment with HR Monday morning. Tell them I sent you." Amanda left. Stephanie thought briefly about the fact that she was going to need to give Amanda an actual job before the internship ended. She filed that under things that would happen and went back to the Marigold Street remediation estimate. 5:40 a.m., she was at the service entrance of Crestline before the overnight cleaning crew finished their last walkthrough. No suit, wool sweater, dark grey. The good kind that was off to hell have lost its shape slightly in the wash and become comfortable. Dark jeans, her grandfather's watch on her wrist, hair pulled back simply, not architecturally. She stood near the first door with her hands in her pockets and her breath making small clouds in the February air, and she was not nervous exactly. She was careful. She had learned slowly the difference. At 6:12, she heard the sound of the gate code. The service door opened. Daniel stepped through in his work uniform, foam backpack over one shoulder, Mr. Green in his right hand. He saw her immediately, stopped completely still for a half second, which was not long but was noticeable in a person whose baseline was measured movement. "Do you have a few minutes?" He looked at her, the brown eyes that didn't perform anything. "For what? To talk? No slides, no room full of people, no mat, A long beat. The assessment not suspicious. It was just honest. He was reading the situation the same way he read everything, which was carefully and without the filter of what he wanted it to be. All right, they went to the roof, the utility maintenance access that Daniel knew and that Stephanie had never visited in 3 years of running the building. Through a door and up a concrete stairway and out into Denver at 6:15 a.m. cold, quiet. The Rockies still dark in the west, the sky going from black to the particular shade of navy blue that existed for about 7 minutes before it committed to morning. She didn't ease into it. I know who you are. I know about Fort Armitage. I know about George Calloway. She turned to look at him. George Calloway is the brother of my closest friend from high school. He came to every tournament my father missed. He was the person I called when I got lost, which was more often than I told anyone. Daniel was looking at the city. His profile was very still. The scar on his jaw, the temples going silver. He emailed me, she said, Monday morning. He said he recognized the technique before he recognized anything else. He said you were still teaching just differently. Something moved through his expression, not visible to anyone who hadn't been watching him carefully for several days. What else did he say? That he wasn't angry. That he wasn't then and he's not now. The silence went on long enough that she could hear the ventilation equipment from the rooftop units, the low hum of the building doing what it did. A pigeon landed on the upper edge of the roof and immediately decided against it and left. I almost fired you, Stephanie said. Ronald's budget proposal on Tuesday afternoon, I agreed without thinking. Then I thought. She paused. What changed wasn't information. It was something I saw on the mat before I knew any of it. A pause. You extended your hand. When I wouldn't take it, you didn't adjust your expression. You didn't recalibrate. You just accepted it and went back to work. I've met a lot of people who said they were above ego. You're the first one I've believed. He turned to look at her. Really look. For the first time this morning. I wasn't doing it for you, he said. Not unkind. Just accurate. I was doing it because I've spent 12 years trying to figure out what it looks like when force is the wrong answer. That was the first time I had a clean opportunity to find out. She looked at him. The answer is you put it down, he said. You just put it down, and you find out whether you're still standing without it. The sky was doing its 7-minute thing. Navy to gray to something that would, in another 4 minutes, be actual morning. She had the feeling of being in a conversation that was happening slightly ahead of her ability to process it, which was not a feeling she was accustomed to and was not entirely uncomfortable. I need to ask you something, she said. You can say no, he waited. Friday. Not a company event. No agenda, no outcome I've decided on in advance. Just a room. And people who might benefit from whatever it is you understand, that I can't figure out how to teach from my own position. She paused. I can't offer you something that makes it worth your time, except that I'll tell you the truth, which is that I don't know what I'm doing, and in my experience the only things worth doing are the ones you go into without knowing. He looked at the mountains for a long time. The city below was starting to move. The first commuters, the delivery trucks, the particular morning sound of a place waking up to its own ordinary complexity. What would you call it? Not a no, she thought about it. The words arrived before she'd decided on them, still standing. The fight you don't always see. He was quiet for another moment. Then, I'll need a room that isn't set up like a presentation. I'll handle it. He turned away from the view and looked at her directly. The mop's name is Gerald. She blinked. I know. Olivia mentioned it in the letter. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, exactly. More the expression of a man who had long since accepted that his daughter operated on a frequency slightly above what he could fully track. Of course she did. The corner of his mouth moved very slightly, in a direction that was not quite a smile but was the shape a smile occupied when it was deciding. He picked up his mug. He went back toward the door. She watched him go. She stood on the roof in the cold for another few minutes. The sun cleared the edge of Denver's skyline. Light hit the mountains. The Rockies went from gray to gold in the space of a breath. The way they always did, like it cost them nothing. Like they had been doing it every morning without waiting for anyone to notice. She stood there and let it happen. Then she went to work. She had a room to arrange. The envelope was small. Lavender slightly soft at the corners, the way paper got when it had been handled more than once before being delivered. It was sitting on the floor inside Stephanie's office door. When she arrived Wednesday morning, not slipped under the gap, but resting against it, which meant someone had opened the door and placed it there deliberately. No stamp, no return address. Just her name in the rounded, slightly leftward-leaning handwriting of someone who had not yet decided what their handwriting was going to be. To Miss Stephanie. From Olivia. She picked it up and stood in the doorway for a moment with her coat still on. Then she went to her desk and opened it carefully. The way you opened something when you already understood it was going to cost you something to read. The paper inside was torn from a spiral notebook, pink lines, the kind with the holes punched for a 3-ring binder. The writing covered both sides. Blue crayon for the letters, red crayon for the underlines, of which there were several, placed with great intention under words Olivia had apparently decided needed emphasis. Dear Miss Stephanie. Hi, my name is Olivia. I am 8 years old and I am in 3rd grade at Kearney Elementary. My teacher is Miss Bridwell and she's okay. My dad said maybe I shouldn't write this because it might not be polite. But I wanted to anyway because I think polite is sometimes just being scared. Stephanie stopped. Read that sentence again. 8 years old. The child was 8 years old. She kept reading. I saw the video where you and Dad were doing the wrestling thing on the mat. He told me it's called sparring. That is a very strange word. Sparring. I said it out loud 17 times and it still sounds like something a fish would do. Anyway, Dad doesn't smile a lot. Not big smiling. He smiles small and sometimes I have to look fast or I miss it. But the night after the video happened, he came home and he made pancakes and we did not ask for pancakes and it was not anyone's birthday. He also told me a story about being in the Marines. He has a lot of those stories, but he keeps them in a box. He doesn't take them out much. But that night he took one out and told it and he laughed a little at the end. I almost missed it because I was looking at my pancake, but I heard it. So I wanted to say thank you because I think something got lighter for him. Like when you take off a heavy backpack and your shoulders don't know what to do at first. I hope something got lighter for you too. If it didn't yet, maybe it will. P.S. His mop is named Gerald. P.S. Gerald is the dependable type. Stephanie put the letter down on her desk, picked it up again. Read the P.S. twice, put it back down. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook behind the door. She sat in her chair. She looked at the letter and she did not move for a while. Outside her window, Denver was doing its regular Wednesday, indifferent, busy, running on its own schedule. She opened her top drawer and took out 2 things, her grandfather's watch, which lived there during the workday, and the bracket from her first BJJ tournament at 12 years old, which had been in the hallway closet until Sunday night, which she had taken out and then not put back. She set all 3 things together on her desk, the watch, the bracket, the letter, looked at them. Then she opened her laptop and typed 1 email, short, no template, no corporate formatting, this Friday. All staff, come as you are, something real, SH. She hit send before she second-guessed the phrasing. She did not call her father's voicemail that night. She had done it every night for 3 years without exception or examination. That night she picked up the phone and looked at the contact and put the phone back down. She sat on her couch in the glass house that had won an architectural award and had no photographs on the walls, and she looked at the ceiling and she thought about Olivia Whitmore writing. Polite is sometimes just being scared, in blue crayon with red underlines placed with great intention. She thought about the hallway closet, the wooden box inside it, the photograph of 3 people on a mat, herself at 14, George with the crooked grin, her father looking somewhere else. She got up and went to the closet. She opened the box. She took out the photograph and looked at it in the hallway light. She looked at herself, the girl at 14, who was smiling before smiling had to mean something. Before every competition became a message sent to an empty row. She looked at George, who was laughing at something that had happened right before the shutter clicked, something nobody else in the photograph remembered. She looked at her father, who was looking at something outside the frame with the expression of a man already calculating what came next. She put the photograph back, but she left the box out on the shelf, lid open. Not a decision exactly, just not putting it away. She went to bed. She slept. Friday arrived with the particular quality of days that have been building toward themselves all week. The room Stephanie had configured was on the 6th floor, a former training room with a wall of windows facing west. Mountains in the distance. The furniture was stacked east against one wall, and the chairs were in a circle, not a perfect one. She'd done it herself Thursday evening, alone in the building at 7 p.m. Dragging plastic chairs and deciding this one was right and that one was slightly wrong and moving it 2 inches. At some point, she'd stood in the middle of the circle and looked at it and thought, this is what it looks like when you don't know what you're doing and you do it anyway. She'd left it imperfect. People arrived at 6 with the tentative energy of employees who genuinely did not know what to expect. The circle of imperfect chairs. The absence of a presentation screen, the mountains going gold in the windows, none of it looked like anything from the corporate vocabulary they'd been trained to pass. 3 people came in and immediately looked for somewhere to put their phones and discovered there was no designated phone table, which created a small cascade of uncertainty that was actually the first thing the evening did on purpose. Walter Pruitt was there. He'd come early again, sat in one of the chairs near the window, reading something on his phone with the absolute calm of a man who had been in rooms before things started for 40 years and never once felt the need to fill the time. Ronald Bassett came in and chose a chair that was not in the back row, which Stephanie noticed and did not comment on. Amanda was not operating AV equipment. She was just sitting in the circle. Her choice Daniel arrived at 5:58. Work clothes he had not changed, and she had not suggested he should. He came in and looked at the room and the circle and the mountains and the people already seated, and he did the thing he always did, which was assess without performing assessment, and then he sat down. 6 chairs to Stephanie's left. Olivia had arrived at 5:45 and was currently in the office suite with Karen from logistics, who had reported via text that Olivia had asked her 14 questions about how elevators worked and was now drawing something in her notebook. At 6:05, when most people were seated and the room had settled into the particular pre-event quiet of people trying to decide how to hold their bodies, the door opened one more time. The sound of the wheels was quiet on the carpet. George Calloway navigated the door and the slight threshold and came into the room. He was wearing a dark green pullover and khakis, and he had the posture of someone who had long ago made peace with being at eye level with everyone's midsection, and had discovered that this gave you a completely different and often more accurate view of things. His hair was shorter than it had been in the photograph Stephanie had found. His nod to the room was easy, inclusive, not performed. He found an open space in the circle and positioned himself there, and Daniel saw him. It was not a dramatic moment from the outside. Daniel was looking toward the windows when George came in, and he turned toward the sound of the wheels, and then he was looking at George Calloway for the first time in 12 years. His face did not collapse. It did not perform anything. It went through something that was entirely internal, and therefore entirely real, a sequence of recognitions that moved too fast to name individually and resolved into an expression that was, in its final form, very still. Not blank, still.
The difference was everything. George looked back at him.
Easy, clear. The smile that was apparently just his baseline, present without effort, the way some people's faces returned to a particular expression, the way water returned to level. They looked at each other across the circle of plastic chairs and imperfect alignment and mountain light and 12 years of things that had been waiting to arrive at this specific room. George said quietly, in the tone of someone who had been saving a sentence for a specific occasion and had now reached it. Hey, Sergeant. Daniel didn't answer immediately then. George, you look the same. George's voice was easy, genuinely, except for the gray. You look better than you have any right to. George laughed. Actual laughter. Open-throated, unapologetic, the laughter of someone who had decided a long time ago that laughter was non-negotiable even in rooms where it was unexpected. The chair does wonders for the complexion. No leg days, a sound moved through the room. Not quite laughter, more like the collective exhale of 40 people who had been holding something they hadn't known they were holding. The shift was physical, measurable, shoulders dropped. People who had been sitting carefully sat differently. Stephanie was watching Daniel. His mouth had done the thing she'd seen once before on the roof at 6:15 in the morning. Not quite a smile. The shape a smile made when it was coming from somewhere below the usual place smiles came from. She looked away before Chica caught her watching. She let the room settle for 2 full minutes after 6 p.m., which was long enough that 3 people shifted in their chairs, and Karen, who had slipped in with Olivia now seated on the floor near the window, with her notebook, actually looked at her watch. Stephanie had discovered, through 20 years of running rooms, that the people who could tolerate 2 minutes of unstructured silence were the people who were actually present. Everyone else was managing their discomfort. 43 people, about 30 of them had made it through without looking at their phones. Good enough, I want to try something different, she said. No agenda, no slides, no outcome we're building toward. She looked around the circle. One question, You can answer it out loud, or you can just hold it. When do you feel most like yourself? The woman who answered first was Petra, from overnight security, who almost never attended company events. She said without apparent self-consciousness, "When I'm in my garden at 5 a.m. before anyone else is up. Nothing needs me to be anything in particular." Then the engineer from the second floor. "When I'm debugging. When there's just the code and what it's actually doing." Then Karen. "When my daughter laughs at something," I said. "Because she's 12 and mostly she doesn't think I'm funny anymore." Something happened in the room with each answer. The particular shift that occurred when people stopped performing their professional selves and the actual people underneath began to take up space. Stephanie waited. Then she looked at Daniel. He'd been listening without visibly preparing his answer. His voice, when it came, was low and without performance. "When I'm moving and I'm not thinking about moving. When the body just knows what it's doing and the mind can stop supervising." Several people who trained anything nodded involuntarily. Her turn. She'd written 3 versions of what she was going to say and thrown them all out and arrived here with nothing prepared. "When I lose something," she said, "and I'm still here afterward." The room absorbed this the way rooms absorbed things when someone had said something that was exactly, precisely true. No reaction that oversold it. Just the air shifting slightly, the way air shifted when something landed. Daniel looked at her across the circle. She felt it without turning toward him. George, 2 chairs to Daniel's left, was looking at his own hands. Daniel led the second half. He stood at one point, not to command the space, but because what he was trying to demonstrate required moving. He showed the group a standing posture, nothing martial about it. Just how to stand with weight distributed evenly, spine neutral, knees not locked. The basic physical condition of being present in your body without bracing against anything. Half the room corrected their posture immediately, unconsciously. Without being asked, he talked about the difference between reaction and response. Reaction being automatic, sourced from the part of the nervous system that could not distinguish between a physical threat and a performance review. Response being chosen, slower, requiring the half-second of space between stimulus and action that had to be built deliberately, like building any other skill. "The half-second is learnable," he said. "You don't have to be born with it. You practice finding it until it's available when you need it." Someone asked, "What do you practice when you practice it?" Stillness under something uncomfortable. He paused, finding words for something he'd spent years as understanding in the body rather than language. You sit with something that wants you to react, and you don't react yet. "And you notice what happens in the space?" Petra asked. "Have you ever been afraid that not reacting made you a coward?" The room went quiet in a particular way. "Yes," Daniel said. For a long time, he didn't elaborate immediately. Just let the yes stand on its own, which was the honest answer and the useful one. "I confused not retaliating with not having a spine. It took me a long time to understand they were opposite things. Not retaliating when you could, when you had the skill and the leverage and the moment, that's not weakness. That's the hardest possible use of strength." Walter Pruitt, in his chair near the window, was looking at his hands. His jaw was moving slightly, the way it did when he was processing something he agreed with completely and had no desire to interrupt. George Calloway was looking at Daniel directly. His expression was not complicated. It was simple in the way of things that had been a long time arriving, clear, finished, like a door that had been open for 12 years and had finally, quietly found its frame. Ronald Bassett was in his chair in the circle, not performing anything, not managing his posture. Just there, in the way that people were there when something had reached them. After the room emptied slowly, people leaving slowly being a sign that something had extended past the scheduled hour into actual time. Most left with the quality of someone who had not gotten what they expected and was not sure yet if what they got was better, but suspected it might be. Amanda paused at the door, found Stephanie near the window. "I know this isn't the time," she said, "but if there's a permanent position in communications available at some point, I want to be considered." Stephanie looked at her. "Make an appointment with HR Monday morning. Tell them I sent you." Amanda nodded, left. The door closed. That left Stephanie, Daniel, George, Walter Pruitt, and Olivia, who had been in the circle for the last 40 minutes, having been brought up from the office suite by Karen, who had reported that Olivia had politely informed her she was ready to go upstairs now. Olivia had spent the session on the floor near the window, drawing in her spiral notebook with the focused attention of a person engaged in urgent creative work. Across the room, George and Daniel were near the coffee station. Daniel had made coffee himself, finding the supplies without asking anyone where they were, because he understood buildings. George accepted a cup, took one sip, made the specific face of someone who had committed to finishing it anyway. "This is terrible," George said. "Yes," Daniel said. You had 12 years to learn how to make coffee. I've had other things to learn. George looked at him over the cup. I know, not deflection, not diplomacy, just acknowledgement, specific and complete. That's why I came. He set the cup down. He looked at Daniel the way he'd been looking at him all evening, directly, without the particular tension that came from unresolved things. I've been doing a lot of things for 12 years. Teaching, the adaptive sports program, going to competitions and watching kids figure out what their bodies can do in a chair, which is more than you'd think. He paused. I'm not going to tell you it was fine. Some of it was very not fine. He met Daniel's eyes. But I've been wanting to say something specific to you for a while, and I didn't have a way to get it to you. And then the universe apparently decided to use this woman's flaw as a delivery mechanism. Daniel's mouth moved. Not a smile yet. The approach of one. I'm not carrying it, George said. The incident. What happened? I want you to know that I'm not carrying it. I put it down a long time ago because it was not useful. I want you to put it down too. A beat. 2 beats. Daniel was looking at the coffee carafe, at the label on the side, at anything it seemed except George's face, and then he looked at George's face. I don't know how, he said. It came out without the wrapping that most sentences came with. Raw in the specific way of things said when the usual machinery was offline. I know you don't. George's voice was steady. Not with the performance of steadiness, but with the actual thing. That's why I've been fixing buildings. A pause. You've been punishing yourself for 12 years, and I need you to stop. Not for me. I'm fine in the specific, complicated ways that fine actually means. For you, his jaw was set. You're wasting something. Daniel was still looking at him. I've watched that clip 17 times, George said, including once with my 8th period class, who I told were watching it for a lesson about de-escalation. That is not a man who lost himself. That is a man who found something better than what he had before and doesn't know it yet. The mountains outside had gone from gold to the deep amber that preceded the day's last light. The room was lit by overhead fluorescents that were not flattering to anyone, and somehow none of that mattered. Daniel reached out and picked up his terrible cup of coffee. Held it. Did not drink it. Okay, he said. Not dramatic. Not a declaration. Just a word placed at the end of something long. George nodded once. Done with the main business of what he'd come to say. And then, because he was George and because this was apparently who he was, now, is there any chance of getting different coffee? Because this is genuinely bad and I've been very diplomatic about it. Walter Pruitt, from across the room where he'd been examining the chair arrangement with professional interest, said without looking up. There's a good place 2 blocks south. I saw it coming in. George looked at him. Are you the sensei? I prefer coach. Are you the reason she's been good at this for 20 years? I'm the reason she's been technically excellent. She's been working on good independently. He finally looked up. You want decent coffee? I'll walk with you. George looked at Pruitt for a moment with the expression of someone reassessing their expectations upward. I do want decent coffee. He turned to Daniel. Are you coming? Daniel looked at Stephanie across the length of the room. She was near the window, standing next to Olivia, who had stopped drawing and was looking at the mountains with the focused attention she gave to things she found genuinely important. In a minute, he said. He crossed the room. Olivia heard him coming and looked up from her notebook. She'd been working on something for the last hour with the focused intensity she brought to things that mattered to her, which was most things, but some things more than others. She held the notebook up now, slightly, in the way it felt of someone offering something they'd made and were genuinely curious about how it would be received. He took it, looked at it, the circle of chairs, rendered in blue crayon, the mountains through the windows as simple ascending triangles, 3 stick figures in the center, one labeled D, one labeled G, one labeled S, the last one with what appeared to be an architectural crown that was meant to be a ponytail, but had taken on considerably more grandeur in execution. And in the center of the circle, where no chair was, a space she'd left deliberately empty. She'd drawn a small spiral there, tight in the center, opening outward. What's this? He asked, pointing to the spiral. She considered where the thing is. The thing that happens in the middle when everyone's talking. He looked at it for another moment. Then at her. Gerald wanted me to ask, she said, with the seriousness of someone raising a legitimate procedural point, if he can come to the new place. The one on Marigold Street. Stephanie, standing 2 feet away, made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. Daniel looked at her. Gerald is a mop. He knows that, Olivia said. He's not expecting anything fancy. Stephanie's mouth was doing something. Not the CEO smile, not the press smile, not any of the smiles that had a function. The one that arrived when you hadn't prepared a defense against whatever was coming, and the thing came anyway. and it turned out the undefended version of your face was the better one. Gerald is welcome at Marigold Street location, she said, managing her voice. I'll make sure there's adequate storage. Olivia appeared satisfied. She took the notebook back and added something small in the corner of the spiral drawing, a tiny rectangle labeled Dewey with 4 small lines extending from it. Gerald, present at the center. She examined for a moment and then closed the notebook with the decisive click of someone who had finished what they came to do. Daniel was looking at Stephanie. Not the way he looked at things he was assessing. The other way. The way he looked at things he had already understood and was simply acknowledging. She met it for a moment and then looked at the mountains, which had gone dark now. So what she was actually looking at was her own reflection in the glass and his reflection 2 feet behind it, and Olivia's reflection on the floor below that, the 3 of them superimposed over the place where the Rockies had been a few minutes ago. The coffee place is 2 blocks south, he said. I know where it is. It's my neighborhood. Olivia needs hot chocolate. Is that non-negotiable? Olivia looked up from her bag, where she was packing the notebook away with the methodical care she applied to anything she'd made. It's my word, she said, with the serenity of someone who had found exactly the right term for a long-standing position and was simply reporting it. Stephanie looked at the notebook going into the bag, at the spiral drawing inside it, at the tiny labeled rectangle at its center. She thought about a hallway closet and a wooden box left open on a shelf. She thought about a photograph of 3 people on a mat, one already gone to a heart attack in an empty compartment, one having driven away before the medal ceremony, and one sitting on the floor of a 6th-floor room in Denver with a crayon drawing the thing that happened when everyone was talking. She thought, polite is sometimes just being scared. All right, she said. Hot chocolate. Non-negotiable. Olivia stood and gathered her things with the efficiency of someone who had been ready to leave for several minutes and had been patiently waiting for the adults to catch up with a decision she'd already made. 4 of them walked out of the building together, Stephanie, Daniel, Olivia, and found George and Pruitt waiting on the sidewalk. George with his jacket zipped, despite the February cold, in the particular way of someone who had either adapted to it or was making a philosophical statement about it. Pruitt with his belt still folded over one arm like a man who carried his work wherever he went and saw no reason to adjust this for a Friday evening. Denver at 6:45 in February. The air had that specific quality it got at this hour in this season, clean, thin, cold enough to register but not cold enough to punish. The street was doing the thing streets did at the end of a work week, which was exhale. People moving with a slightly different quality than the morning, less directed, more lateral, the particular energy of people who had put something down and were still figuring out what to do with their newly empty hands. The coffee place was 2 blocks south and 1 block west, on the corner where an old brick building had been gutted and refaced with glass, and was now the particular mix of preserved bones and new surface that Denver was doing everywhere it could. Warm inside, smelled like coffee and something baked with cardamom. The particular ambient noise of people who had arrived separately and were all doing different things that were all, at the level of the room, the same thing, finding somewhere to be that wasn't the place they'd been all day. They took a table in the back. Not large enough for 5. Not quite large enough, which meant they were close together around it, which was fine, more than fine. Pruitt ordered black coffee, which turned out to be excellent, and which he received with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose standards were occasionally met and who noted this without ceremony. George ordered the same and said, upon tasting it, there it is, with the specific relief of moment returning from somewhere difficult to something he'd been looking forward to the whole time. He looked at Pruitt. You knew this place was going to be good. I looked at the window when I drove past this morning. You cased the coffee shop. I cased the coffee shop. George considered this. I respect that. Olivia had her hot chocolate. She wrapped both hands around the mug in the 2-handed grip she used for anything that was warm and worth treating carefully, and looked at the room with the cataloging attention she applied to all new environments, identifying which things were interesting and which things were furniture. The espresso machine was interesting. The chalk menu board with the elaborate lettering was furniture. The man at the corner table reading an actual paper newspaper was interesting. She had brought her notebook. She was drawing something small in the margin of the spiral page, adding to it without looking down, which was a skill Daniel had never been able to explain and had stopped trying. For a while nobody said anything that needed to be said. They said things like, "This is good," and "Yes, considerably better. The building has good bones, the Marigold place. I looked it up and the adaptive sports program started with 6 kids and now has 34. And things that were conversation-shaped, but were actually just the sound of a table of people who had arrived somewhere together and were taking a moment before whatever came next. The particular quality of aftermath that wasn't emptiness. More like a room after music still full of what had been in it, settling. At one point, George said, with the tone of someone raising a perfectly practical matter. "Someone needs to fix the HVAC at Kearney High." Looked at him. "Which floor?" "Third. The art room. It's been making a sound since October." "What kind of sound?" "Like a very small, very unhappy animal. That's the damper seal." "Probably the secondary damper." He paused. "I'll take a look." George looked at him. "You don't have to, I know. Simple. No performance around it. I'll take a look." "A beat." "Okay," George said. They drank their coffee. The room went on around them. Olivia added something to the margin drawing without looking down. Then Olivia looked up from a notebook and said, to no one in particular, "The fish's name is Leonard." Everyone at the table looked at her. "The class fish," she clarified, with the patience of someone accustomed to providing context for statements she felt were self-explanatory. "At school, they named it wrong. It should be Leonard." "What's it currently named?" Pruitt asked. "Splash." Her voice conveyed exactly what she thought of this decision. The full weight of it, Pruitt nodded slowly, with the gravity of someone who understood that naming was serious, and that Splash was, in fact, a difficult position to recover from. "Splash is a challenging starting point." "I've started a petition," Olivia said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Olivia, it's a legitimate process, Dad. It's a classroom fish. Leonard has rights." George made a sound into his coffee cup that was not quite a laugh, but was clearly a laugh. Pruitt looked at the ceiling in the way of someone who agreed but felt it would be inappropriate to show it. Stephanie looked at Daniel. He looked at her. Something passed between them, the particular language of two people who were only beginning to understand each other but had already developed fluency in the specific register of this child is remarkable. And I mean that with my whole self. She looked away first. Back at the table, at the 5 of them, at George's hand around his coffee cup and Pruitt's belt on the back of his chair, and Olivia's spiral drawing open on the table now, the tiny Gerald at the center, and Daniel's work uniform with the small wear at the left cuff, and her own grandfather's watch on her wrist, catching the warm light of the coffee shop in a way that made it look exactly like what it was, something old, still running, kept because it mattered. She thought about her father. Not the version she performed for investors or mentioned in interviews when asked about formative influences. The real version, the man who had looked at a row of trophies and seen a record of minimum requirements met. The man whose voicemails she'd been filling for 3 years with 11 words and a disconnection. The truth was simpler and harder than the story she'd built around it. Her father had not known how to be proud in a way that reached another person. Whether that was his damage or his design or simply the particular limitation of a man who had spent 32 years in a structure that rewarded performance over presence, she had stopped trying to diagnose it. What she knew was that she had inherited his methodology without meaning to. She had built a company the way he'd built a career, optimized, defended, impossible to fault and impossible to enter. Daniel had entered it, not through the front door. Through a ventilation unit that needed servicing, at 6 in the morning, before anyone else arrived. He had entered through the maintenance access, which was the access built for the people who kept the structure standing, and which nobody who worked in the structure thought about until something stopped working. She thought about what it meant that the thing she'd been looking for had come in through the service entrance. She thought, maybe that's always how it comes. Maybe the thing worth finding never announces itself at the front door. Olivia was showing George the spiral drawing and explaining the logic of each element with the thoroughness of an architect presenting a project she'd spent months on. George was listening with complete attention, the specific attention of someone who understood that being listened to carefully was a form of respect, and who therefore gave it the same way. He asked a clarifying question about the spiral. Olivia answered it. He asked another. She answered that too, and then added information he hadn't asked for because she'd decided he needed it, which was how she operated, and which Daniel had long since accepted was simply the correct approach to the world. Pruitt was watching them with the expression he got when he was witnessing something technically correct, the slight fault and quality of someone recognizing good form. Daniel was looking at his coffee cup, his hands on the table, both of them open. Not the closed left hand that Amanda had noticed in the clip, the one that had been holding something down, open, resting. The difference was the whole story, and he probably didn't know he was showing it. Stephanie looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Then she said quietly, not across the table but sideways to him, the way you talked in a coffee shop when you were saying something that wasn't for the whole table. The Marigold Street space has a back room, bigger than the main room, better light. I had the building manager unlock it when I signed the paperwork. She paused. In case the program grows, he looked at her. You're assuming it'll grow. I'm assuming you'll teach it the same way you did tonight. In which case, yes. She looked at the table. I know a lot of people who could use a room where the question is, when do you feel most like yourself? And the answer is allowed to be true. He was quiet for a moment. That's not a BJJ program. No, she agreed. It's not, I don't know what to call it, you already named it. She looked at him. Still standing, the corner of his mouth did the thing again. She was starting to understand that this was the real smile, the small one, the one that arrived without announcement and left before it could be catalogued. The large ones were for Olivia and for moments of genuine absurdity. This one was for things that landed exactly right. The back room, he said. Available whenever. I'll need to look at the HVAC first. Of course you will. He looked at the mountains through the coffee shop window, invisible now in the dark, but present in the way they were always present, which was completely and without needing to be seen. Okay, he said. The same word he'd said to George earlier, in the same register. A word placed at the end of something long. The table cleared eventually. Pruitt left first, standing without ceremony and folding the belt back over his arm. He paused behind Stephanie's chair on the way out and said, without stopping, without looking down, you did the hard thing twice this week, once on Friday and once on Tuesday when you played the real version. He kept moving toward the door. That's the ratio, more or less. 2 hard things per week, keep it up. He was out the door before she could respond. She looked at the space where he'd been. George, across the table, was watching the door close, with the expression of someone who had just met a person they intended to think about for a while. George left 20 minutes later. He maneuvered out from the table with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this in every configuration of restaurant furniture for 12 years and had developed opinions about table heights. He shook Daniel's hand, the real kind, the both hands kind, the kind that was for things that didn't have other forms. He looked at Stephanie and said, you did good, Steph, the real version. George would have come anyway, but you did good. He pulled his jacket closed, looked at Olivia. What's Leonard's last name? Olivia looked up from the drawing she'd been adding to during the conversation. She appeared to have not considered this until this moment. She considered it now, seriously, for about 4 seconds. Leonard T. Splash, she said. He kept part of it. For continuity, George looked at her for a long moment. That's very fair of him, he said. And then he left, and the sound of the wheels on the floor faded toward the door, and they were 3. Olivia looked at her hot chocolate, which was down to the last inch, and had been for a while, because she'd been rationing it with the unconscious resource management of someone who understood that when something good was almost gone, the answer was not to rush. She drank the last inch, set the mug down with the particular finality of someone completing a thing they'd been pacing themselves toward. Can we come back here? She said. Not to either of them specifically. To the room, yes, Daniel said. Can Gerald come? Gerald cannot come. Gerald is a mop. He could come in the bag, absolutely not. Olivia accepted this with the graces of someone who had made the position known and was willing to let the record reflect it and move on. She gathered her notebook and her jacket and her backpack, which still listed left even with half its contents onto the doubleon in front of her, and she stood up. Daniel stood. Stephanie stood. The table had the particular quality of a table after people have sat at it for a while, glasses and cups slightly displaced from their starting positions, the small archaeology of a conversation that had covered ground. They went to the door together. Daniel held it. Olivia went through first. Then Stephanie, who paused in the doorway for a half-second because the cold hit at the threshold and the instinct was to brace for it. She stepped out. The cold was exact and clean, and the kind that clarified rather than punished. The street was quieter now. The Friday night energy had moved to the restaurants and bars a block over. This corner was between things, which gave it a quality of being briefly unconstructed, available, belonging to whoever was in it. Olivia stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky, which was clear in the specific way Denver skies were clear in winter black and enormous and full of stars that the city's light could not entirely swallow. She found something she was looking for and pointed at it. That one, she said, not asking anyone to confirm. Just noting it for the record. Daniel looked where she was pointing. Stephanie looked too, just a star. Bright, fixed, not particularly notable among the other stars except that Olivia had selected it, which made it notable. Which one is it? Stephanie asked. Olivia lowered her hand. I don't know its name, she said. I just like that it stays there. Stephanie looked at it for another moment, she thought. Some things are just present, regardless. And that's the thing about them, not what they're called, not what they mean, just that they stay. They walked back toward the Crestline building where Daniel's truck was parked. Olivia walked between them, not because anyone had arranged it that way, but because the sidewalk was that width, and she was that size, and this was where she fit. She was still looking at things, the lit window of an apartment above a dry cleaner, a pigeon roosting in a doorway, with the affronted dignity of something that had not expected company, a chalk drawing on the pavement that was either a sun or a face and possibly both. At one point, without looking up from the chalk drawing she'd stopped to examine, Olivia said, Dad used to call Mom every night, just to say one thing, then hang up. She said it the way she said things she'd been holding for a while, not heavy, just considered. I think that's why he still talks to Gerald, because Gerald listens and doesn't need anything back. Daniel was very still for a moment. Then, where did you hear that? About Mom or about Gerald either? About Mom, Aunt Patrice told me. About Gerald I figured it out. She straightened up from the chalk drawing, started walking again. Gerald is the dependable type I told you. Stephanie did not look at Daniel. She looked straight ahead at the street, at the particular quality of light on pavement after cold. She understood some things in that moment that she hadn't had language for yet, that this child was not incidentally wise. She was the product of a father who had spent 5 years alone with her, since she was 3, talking to her like her questions mattered, taking her to work on Saturdays, letting her name the things that needed names. Olivia was what happened when someone decided that the smallest person in the house deserved the same quality of attention as everything else. She thought about her own father, about the years she had spent compressing herself to fit the shape of his approval, about what she might become if someone had said, early enough, your questions matter. The thing you noticed is real. The name you gave it is correct, she thought. I am 34 years old and I am just beginning to understand that I don't have to earn the right to take up space, she thought. That's what he figured out. Not in a room with words. On a mat, on a garage training mat, in the service corridors of other people's buildings. He put down the thing that said he had to earn it, and he found out he was still standing without it. At the Crestline parking lot, Olivia spotted the truck and angled toward it with the directional confidence of someone who always knew where the truck was. She climbed in the passenger side and immediately located her seatbelt, and then immediately located the book she'd left on the seat, the Migratory Birds Library book, and opened it to a page she'd dog-eared, which Daniel had a policy against and which Olivia did anyway, with the cheerful non-compliance of someone who understood that policies applied to library books were aspirational. Daniel stood outside the truck for a moment. He looked at Stephanie. The parking lot was lit by the particular orange-white of security lighting, which was not flattering and did not matter. The Marigold Street keys, he said, are yours. The lease is in the program's name. I'll set up a non-profit filing if you want to go that direction. Amanda knows someone in non-profit law who owes her a favor from a client conflict last year. She paused. Or you can just keep it informal. Either way, the space is there. He was quiet. Why? She thought about how to answer that honestly. Not the version that was true but manageable. The actual version, because I spent 6 months in the same building as you and didn't know your name. And then you got on a mat in front of my entire company and showed me something about how to be in the world that I've been trying to learn since I was 15 years old. She looked at him. And because Olivia wrote me a letter in blue crayon that said polite is sometimes just being scared, and she was right, and she's your kid. So she stopped. That was enough. That was the actual reason. He looked at her for a moment, the brown eyes, the scar, the temples, the expression that didn't perform. Thank you, he said. It was the same 2 words he'd sent in the facilities ticket when she forwarded the Marigold Street paperwork. But this version was different. This version came with the full weight of the thing behind it, which was 12 years of a man learning to put something down, and someone handing him a room in which to put it, and both of them understanding that this was not a transaction. It was something else. They didn't have a name for it yet. They were both, in their different ways, people who had learned to be careful about naming things before they understood them. "I'll look at the HVAC Monday," he said. "The back room first," she said. "Better light," he nodded. Got in the truck. Through the windshield she could see Olivia already deep in the Migratory Birds book, turning a page with the 2-handed grip she used for anything worth treating carefully. The truck started, pulled out, turned south toward the highway and the West Denver neighborhood, and the rental house with the garage and the 2x3 training mat worn smooth at the center, where a man had been practicing every night for 12 years. The thing he was only now learning was not penance. It was just a keeping himself available for whatever came next. Stephanie stood in the parking lot for a minute after the truck's taillights had turned the corner. The cold was doing its thing. The mountains were somewhere to the west, invisible and completely present. She took out her phone. She opened the contacts. She scrolled to the entry that said Dad's cell and looked at it for a long moment. The number that still connected. The voicemail that still answered. The 11 words she'd been leaving there every night for 3 years like flowers on a grave that could hear them. She thought about what Olivia had said. About Daniel calling Emma. Just to say one thing. Because she listened and didn't need anything back. She thought about what she'd been doing. Not the same thing. Not quite. She'd been calling her father's voicemail to deliver a report to someone who had never been able to receive it. She'd been leaving proof of performance on the phone of a man who had spent her whole life not knowing how to receive what she was giving him. She closed the contact without dialing. She stood in the parking lot for another moment. Then she did something she hadn't done since she was 12 years old. Standing in a tournament bracket with a medal around her neck, and a row of empty seats behind her, and George Calloway in the front row laughing at something she'd said. She called Donna. Donna picked up on the second ring. Background sounds, home sounds. Something on television in another room. Steph, warm, ready. The voice of someone who had been waiting for this call in the way you waited for something you knew was coming. He was there, Stephanie said. George, he came, I know. A pause. How was it? It was, she stopped. Found the word that was true. Right, it was right. The way things are right when they've been waiting to happen for a long time and then they finally do and nothing explodes. She paused. It was very quiet, that was the thing. I expected something bigger. It was just quiet. And then they were talking about coffee. Donna laughed. Actual laughter, the kind that was also a little bit relief. That's George? Yes. A comfortable silence. The kind they'd been trading for 22 years. And the other thing, Donna said carefully. The thing that isn't just about George. Stephanie looked at the mountains she couldn't see. I don't know what it is yet. That's okay. I'm not good at knowing, I know. A pause. You're better at it than you think. You've been not knowing since Tuesday and you haven't imploded. Stephanie looked at the sky. Clear, cold, enormous, the star that stayed there. Olivia named the classroom fish Leonard T. Splash, she said. He kept part of the original name. For continuity, Donna was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, I like her. She's remarkable, Stephanie added. Simple as that? Yeah. Donna's the voice had something in it that was warm and specific. Sounds like she has good people around her. A pause. Go home, Steph. It's cold. Stephanie looked at the empty parking lot. At the space where the truck had been. At the street beyond it, and the city beyond that, and the mountains beyond the city, present in the dark, not announcing themselves, not needing to. Yeah, she said. Okay, she hung up. She stood for one more moment. She did not call her father's voicemail. She didn't need to tonight. Maybe tomorrow she would, and maybe she wouldn't. That was a question for tomorrow. Tonight the question was answered not with a declaration or a ceremony, or a long overdue confrontation with a ghost. Just with a parking lot and a clear sky and a phone call to the person who had been her front row when nobody else was. Some losses don't resolve. They just find their right size. They become something you carry differently. Not lighter, necessarily. Just positioned so that it's not in the way of everything else. She turned up her collar. She walked to her car. The drive home was quiet. No music, no calls. Just Denver in the dark, doing what cities did at 9 on a Friday, which was be alive in ways you didn't have to participate in the lit restaurants, the people on sidewalks, the particular energy of a night that still had hours in it and was not in any hurry to spend them. She parked outside her house. Sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. She thought about the wooden box on the closet shelf, the photograph inside it. The girl at 14 who was smiling before smiling had to mean something. She had been trying for 20 years to become the kind of person her father would have recognized as excellent. She had succeeded. She was that person. Efficient, disciplined, technically flawless, unassailable. A company that ran like it had been designed by someone who had decided that disorder was the enemy and had spent a decade making sure nothing could get through. Something had gotten through. It had come in through the services entrance, at 6 in the morning, in work boots and a grey maintenance uniform, carrying a toolkit and a paper bag with lunch and 12 years of something it had learned to carry without showing. It had gotten through not by forcing anything, by being simply exactly what it was. Patient, precise, undecorated. The kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself, she thought. I have been doing the second thing for a long time, and I am just now learning the first. She went inside. The house was glass and clean lines, and the one photograph on the mantel that she'd placed there on Wednesday, 3 people on a mat, herself at 14, George laughing, her father looking somewhere else. She'd put it there not as a memorial and not as a reckoning, just as a fact. This was where I came from. These are the people who were there. This is what it looked like. She was still here, differently configured, but standing. She went to the kitchen, made tea, real tea, loose leaf, in a pot, which took 12 minutes and which she never did on weeknights, because 12 minutes was an unreasonable investment of a weeknight evening, and which tonight she did because she wanted to do something with her hands that required patience and produced warmth. She sat at the kitchen table with the tea and the quiet and the fact of a Friday that had gone the way it went, which was nothing like she'd planned and better than she'd known how to plan. In 3 weeks the Marigold Street space would have its first class. 12 people on the wait list, which Amanda had quietly started maintaining, after word got out through some combination of the Reddit thread and the company-wide email and the organic transmission of information through a city that was, underneath its size, actually a collection of smaller places where people talked to each other. 13 if you counted Olivia, which, Daniel clarified, was not a class she was attending, but a space she would be in because she was 8 and needed somewhere to be on Saturday mornings, and which Olivia had clarified was the same thing. The class would be called Still Standing. The program that grew out of it over the following year would expand to 3 locations and eventually get a small grant from a veteran support organization that had seen the Reddit thread and tracked the story forward to its actual shape. Daniel would run it. Amanda would help with communications when she had time, which she increasingly did, having been hired as junior communications director in March. Walter Pruitt would come on the 3rd Saturday of every month to run a guest session that he called Advanced Stillness, and which was in practice just Pruitt in a room with people who needed someone to sit very quietly with them for an hour without trying to fix anything. George would visit 4 times in the first year. He would teach a session in the fall about the mechanics of adaptation, not about injury or loss, just about what the body knew how to do when you stopped arguing with what it had become. The 8th period class he'd used as a de-escalation case study would hear about the session secondhand, and 7 of them would ask if they could come on a Saturday. He would say yes. Olivia, who would be 9 by then, would lead them on a tour of the space, including the back room, including Gerald's corner, because by then Gerald had a corner and this was simply acknowledged as appropriate, but that was all 3 weeks and 7 months and 1 year away. Tonight there was just the tea in the kitchen and the city going on outside the glass walls in the enormous ordinary way that cities went on, which was to say without particular regard for the things that had shifted inside the people living in them, because cities were for living in, and the shifting was something you did yourself, in the rooms and parking lots and rooftops and coffee shops where the actual work happened. The tea was good. She drank it slowly. She thought about the spiral in Olivia's drawing, tight at the center, opening outward, where the thing is. The thing that happens in the middle when everyone's talking, she thought. That's where it lives, not in the title or the achievement or the edited version of the footage. In the middle of the circle, in the space between what you can do and what you choose to do. In the half-second between reaction and response. In the moment when the floor arrives and you find out whether the thing you've been building is worth standing on. She was still here, differently configured, better weighted, less defended in the ways that made her smaller and more defended in the ways that made her real. Still standing, she finished the tea. She went to bed. The mountains were out there in the dark, the way they always were, enormous and permanent, and not waiting for anyone to notice, because they didn't need to be noticed to be there. That was the thing about them. That had always been the thing. Belts fade. Titles disappear. The edited version of the footage exists for about a week before the real version surfaces and says, this is what actually happened. This is the thing that was in the middle. This is what it looked like when someone chose the second thing. The way you treat someone when you don't have to. The way you extend a hand when you could extend a fist. The way you go back to work when you could take a bow. The way you show up at 6 in the morning through the service entrance because the building needs someone who will that stays. Long after the story ends,